The telegram arrived on Florence Olivetti's 25th birthday, though no one in Hamilton, Wyoming had bothered to remember the occasion except her younger sister Margaret, who'd sent a brief, pitying note from back east. Florence stood behind the counter of the general store, where she'd worked for the past 7 years, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the yellow paper. Her employer, Mrs. Henderson, had handed it to her with that particular expression of sympathy mixed with relief that unmarried women of a certain age had come to recognize. The message was brief and devastating in its simplicity. Her father had passed away in Philadelphia, leaving debts that consumed whatever modest inheritance might have been hers. Margaret, newly married to a banker, expressed her condolences but made it clear there was no room in her household for a spinster sister. Florence read the words twice before folding the telegram and tucking it into her apron pocket. Around her, the sounds of Hamilton's Main Street filtered through the open door. Horses whinnied, wagon wheels creaked against packed dirt. Men called out to one another in the easy camaraderie of those who belonged somewhere. She had lived in this town for 3 years now, having fled Philadelphia after a failed engagement left her reputation in tatters. The man had been a charlatan, taking what little money she'd saved before disappearing into the night. She'd been 22 then, still young enough to harbor hopes of starting fresh. Now, at 25, she heard the whispers. Spinster, old maid. A woman past her prime, destined to live on the charity of others until she withered away entirely. Mrs. Henderson had hinted just last week that her niece might be coming to work at the store, a suggestion that carried the weight of an impending dismissal. Florence straightened her shoulders and returned to inventorying the new shipment of fabric that had arrived that morning. The calico prints blurred slightly as tears threatened, but she blinked them away. She'd learned long ago that tears solved nothing. What she needed was a plan, though for the life of her, she couldn't imagine what that might be. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to find Henry Northwood standing in the doorway, his broad frame blocking out the afternoon sun. She'd seen him in town before, though they'd never been properly introduced. He owned a ranch about 10 miles outside Hamilton, a sprawling property that ran cattle across the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. He was perhaps 30 years old, tall and weathered in the way of men who spent their lives working the land. His dark hair needed a trim, and dust covered his boots and the lower half of his trousers. "Afternoon," he said, removing his hat to reveal eyes the color of storm clouds. "I'm looking for some supplies. Figured I'd try here before heading over to Morrison's." "Of course," Florence replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "What do you need?" He pulled a list from his shirt pocket, and as he read off items, flour, sugar, coffee, nails, rope, she gathered them efficiently. She'd become expert at anticipating what ranchers needed, could pack supplies with a precision that minimized breakage and wasted space. It was a small skill, perhaps, but it was hers. As she worked, she felt his gaze on her. Not the leering attention she'd sometimes endured from other men, but something more thoughtful, appraising. When she glanced up, he didn't look away. "You've got a good system," he observed, gesturing to the way she'd organized the supplies. "Efficient." 7 years of practice, she said. "That's longer than most folks stay in one position. You must be good at what you do." The simple observation, free of pity or condescension, loosened something in her chest. "I try to be." He nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "I heard you might be looking for new employment soon." Lawrence's hand stilled on the bag of flour she'd been wrapping. Small towns had no secrets. News travels fast. It does. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I've got a proposition if you're willing to hear it." She met his eyes directly. "I'm listening. My ranch, it needs a manager. Someone who can keep the books, manage supplies, coordinate the hands during roundup. My last manager took off for the gold fields in Montana 3 months ago, and I've been trying to do it myself alongside everything else. I'm a fair hand with cattle, but paperwork makes my head spin. The place is suffering for it." Florence's heart began to beat faster. "You're offering me employment." "I am. The pay would be $40 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own quarters in the main house, separate from the bunkhouse where the ranch hands sleep. Meals would be provided. The work would be hard, but I suspect you're not afraid of that." $40 a month was more than she made at the general store. Room and board meant security, a roof over her head. But working on a ranch, living in a house with an unmarried man, even with separate quarters, would set tongues wagging. As if reading her thoughts, Henry continued, "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, lives on the property with her husband who works as my foreman. They'd serve as chaperones if that's a concern. Everything would be proper." "Why me?" Florence asked bluntly. "You don't know me. I know you've been working at this store for years without complaint. I know Tom Richardson tried to shortchange you last month, and you caught the error in his arithmetic within seconds. I know you helped Sarah Mitchell's boy with his reading after school last winter. No charge. And I know you're the kind of person who doesn't give up easy, or you wouldn't have made it this far on your own." He paused. "Also, I'm desperate. Good managers are hard to find, and I suspect you're a lot more capable than most folks give you credit for." The honesty in his words struck her. No false flattery, no elaborate promises, just a straightforward assessment and an offer that could change everything. "When would you need an answer?" she asked. "Take a few days. Think it over. But I'll be honest, Miss Olivetti, I'm hoping you'll say yes. I think you'd be good for the ranch, and I think the ranch might be good for you." After he left with his supplies, Florence stood alone in the store, her mind racing. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the back room, her expression disapproving. "I hope you're not considering that man's offer. A woman alone on a ranch full of cowboys, it's not proper." "Mrs. Chen would be there," Florence said quietly. "Mrs. Chen." Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "A Chinese woman is hardly adequate as a chaperone. People will talk, Florence. People already talk." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "I'm 25 and unmarried. I'm a spinster past my prime with no prospects and no future. What exactly do I have to lose? Your reputation." "What reputation?" Florence untied her apron, her decision crystallizing even as she spoke. "I'll work through the end of the week, Mrs. Henderson. That should give you time to train your niece." She walked out of the general store into the bright Wyoming afternoon, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in years, she felt something other than resigned acceptance. She felt alive. The following Saturday, Henry Northwood arrived in town with a wagon to collect her. Florence's possessions fit into 2 battered trunks, a testament to how little she'd accumulated in her 25 years. As they loaded the trunks into the wagon bed, she noticed several townswomen watching from across the street, their heads together in obvious gossip. "Having second thoughts?" Henry asked, following her gaze. "No," she said firmly. "Just saying goodbye to a place that was never really home." The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, following a rough track that wound through rolling grassland before climbing into the foothills. Henry drove the team with easy competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. There was the creek where the cattle came to drink in summer, the stand of cottonwoods that marked the northern boundary of his property, the ridge where he'd found a lost calf last spring. Florence listened, studying the landscape with new eyes. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. The October sky stretched endlessly overhead, so blue it hurt to look at directly. The grass had turned golden with the approaching winter, rippling in waves when the wind blew. In the distance, the Bighorn Mountains rose like a promise, their peaks already dusted with snow. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked. 10 years. My father started it back in '58 when this was still wild country, died when I was 20, left the place to me and my brother. Jacob ran off to San Francisco 5 years ago, so it's been just me since then." He glanced at her. "I built it up from 200 head to near 1,000. But the bookkeeping, the supply management, hiring and paying the hands, it's gotten to be too much alongside everything else. No family to help, parents are gone. Brother's gone. Never found the right woman to marry, I suppose." He said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. Ranching doesn't leave much time for courting. Florence understood that kind of practical solitude. "I was engaged once, back in Philadelphia. He turned out to be more interested in my savings than in me." "His loss," Henry said simply. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a distant cluster of buildings, then resolving into a sprawling compound. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several smaller outbuildings, and an extensive corral system. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, and she could see several men working with horses in one of the corrals. A woman emerged from the main house as they approached, small and neat in a blue cotton dress, her black hair pulled back in a simple bun. She was perhaps 40, with sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed Florence quickly. "Mrs. Chen," Henry said, climbing down from the wagon. "This is Miss Olivetti, our new manager." "Welcome," Mrs. Chen said. Her English was precise, touched with an accent. "I have prepared your room. You must be tired from the journey." "Thank you," Florence said, grateful for the warmth in the woman's voice. Over the next few days, Florence discovered that running a ranch required skills she'd never imagined needing. Mrs. Chen's husband, Douglas, was a quiet man with a gift for handling both cattle and cowboys. He'd been born in San Francisco, he told her, the son of immigrants who'd come during the gold rush. He drifted east looking for work and found it with Henry's father 15 years ago. "Henry's a good man," Douglas told her on her second day, as he showed her the ranch's account books. "Fair, honest, works harder than any of his hands, but he's drowning in paperwork. Hasn't had a full night's sleep in months trying to keep up with everything." The books were a mess, entries scrawled in Henry's rough hand, some dated, others not, calculations half-finished or simply wrong. Florence spent 3 solid days organizing them, creating a system that tracked expenses, income, inventory, and wages. She discovered they were paying too much for feed, that 2 of the hands were drawing advances on their wages at an unsustainable rate, and that they'd nearly been cheated by a cattle buyer in August who'd miscounted the herd. When she presented her findings to Henry, he stared at the neatly organized ledgers with something approaching awe. "How did you do this so fast?" "Numbers make sense," she said. "They follow rules. You just have to know what questions to ask." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've been losing money for months and didn't even realize it. Not anymore. I've renegotiated the feed contract with Morrison's, and I've put Stevens and Hartley on notice about the wage advances. Either they work it off, or they'll need to find employment elsewhere." "You did all that in 3 days. You hired me to manage. I'm managing." She allowed herself a small smile. "Was that not what you wanted?" "It's exactly what I wanted. I'm just impressed." He studied her for a moment. "The men respect you. That's not easy to earn. I'm fair with them. They appreciate that." As October faded into November, Florence settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn, worked through the day managing accounts, ordering supplies, coordinating the hands' schedules, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. The work was demanding, but it satisfied something deep within her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly capable, truly necessary. She and Henry developed an easy working relationship. He'd consult her on decisions, trusting her judgment on financial matters while she deferred to his expertise on cattle and land management. In the evenings, they sometimes sat on the porch after supper, discussing the next day's work or simply watching the sun set over the mountains. It was during one of these evenings in late November that everything changed. "You've transformed this place," Henry said quietly. They sat in companionable silence, wrapped in coats against the cold. "I can actually sleep at night now, knowing the books are in order and the supplies are managed properly." "You've given me a purpose," Florence replied. "For the first time since I was 22, I feel like I'm building something instead of just surviving." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Florence, I need to tell you something." She waited, her heart suddenly racing. "When I hired you, it was purely practical. I needed help, you needed work. But these past weeks, watching you take charge, seeing how you've handled everything, I've come to admire you. More than admire you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've come to care for you in a way that goes beyond employer and employee." Florence's hands tightened on the porch railing. "Henry, I know this complicates things. I know people in town already gossip about the propriety of this arrangement. If my feelings make you uncomfortable, we'll never speak of it again, and nothing between us needs to change professionally. But I had to tell you the truth. You deserve honesty." She turned to face him fully. "And what exactly is the truth?" "That I think you're remarkable, that you're not a spinster past her prime, no matter what small-minded people say. That you're a woman of intelligence and capability and strength, and I find myself thinking about you at the damnedest times. When I'm checking fence lines, when I'm working with the cattle, even when I'm trying to sleep." He laughed softly. "Especially when I'm trying to sleep. I'm 25 years old with no prospects, no family, and a scandal in my past," she said, but her voice shook slightly. "I'm 30 years old, covered in ranch dust more often than not, and so married to this land that I've never made room for much else. I'd say we're well matched." He reached out, hesitating before taking her hand. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I just needed you to know that when I look at you, I see a woman in her prime. I see someone extraordinary." Florence looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused from years of work, her stained with ink from the ledgers. Something warm unfurled in her chest, a feeling she'd thought long dead. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to keep things professional, but I do. Then maybe we could see where this leads, carefully, properly, with no pressure. I'd like that." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good." Over the following weeks, they courted in the stolen moments between work. A touch of hands when reviewing accounts, quiet conversations on the porch after the hands had retired, shared smiles across the dinner table. Mrs. Chen watched them with approval, occasionally creating excuses to leave them alone together. Winter came hard and fast to Wyoming that year. By mid-December, snow lay thick on the ground, and the work of feeding the cattle became grueling. Florence found herself donating her management skills to coordinating the winter feeding schedule, ensuring they had adequate hay, and that every section of the sprawling ranch was covered. It was during a particularly brutal cold snap that disaster struck. One of the hands, a young man named Peter, came racing back to the compound on a lathered horse, shouting that Henry had been thrown while checking on cattle in the far pasture. Florence felt her heart stop. "Where is he?" "North section, by the old line shack. His horse spooked at something, threw him hard. Douglas and Martinez went to get him, but I came back for the wagon and blankets." She moved without thinking, grabbing supplies, organizing the rescue effort with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. But her hands shook as she packed bandages, and her mind raced with terrible possibilities. The weight was excruciating. When Douglas finally brought the wagon back with Henry in the bed, unconscious and pale, Florence had to grip the porch railing to stay upright. "He's alive," Douglas said quickly, seeing her expression. "Hit his head, broke his left arm, but he's alive." They carried him inside, and Florence sent Peter racing to town for the doctor. She sat beside Henry's bed, holding his uninjured hand while Mrs. Chen cleaned the blood from his head wound. "Talk to him," Mrs. Chen said. "Sometimes they can hear, even when they sleep." So Florence talked. She told him about the supply order she'd placed, about how the ranch accounts were in better shape than ever, about the plans she had for improving efficiency in the spring. She told him other things too, in a whisper, about how frightened she'd been, how she'd realized in that moment of terror that she loved him, that she couldn't imagine her life without him in it. His eyes opened near midnight, finding her immediately. "Florence, I'm here." Tears streamed down her face unchecked. "You scared me half to death, Henry Northwood. Sorry." His voice was rough, pained. "My horse spooked at a mountain lion. Stupid of me not to be ready for it. Don't you dare do that again." "Which part, getting thrown or scaring you?" "Either. Both." She gripped his hand tighter. "I meant what I said earlier. I love you." His eyes widened. "I thought I might have dreamed that part." "You didn't dream it. I love you, and when you're healed, we're going to discuss what that means for both of us." "I know what it means for me," he said, ignoring the pain to squeeze her hand. "It means I want to spend the rest of my life with you. It means I want to build this ranch with you, not just as my manager, but as my partner in everything. It means I want to marry you if you'll have me." "Henry, you're injured and possibly concussed. This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time. Life's too short and too uncertain not to say what's true. I love you, Florence Olivetti, not in spite of your age or your past, but because of who you are right now in this moment. You're the strongest, smartest, most capable woman I've ever known, and I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." The doctor arrived before she could answer, shooing her out of the room while he examined Henry. Florence stood in the hallway, her mind whirling. Marriage to Henry. A life here, on this ranch, building something together. It was everything she'd stopped letting herself hope for. When the doctor emerged, he confirmed that Henry had a concussion and a clean break in his left arm, but that he'd recover fully with rest. "Keep him in bed for at least a week," he instructed. "No riding, no heavy work. That head wound needs to heal." Henry proved to be a terrible patient. He argued about staying in bed, tried to review accounts from his room, and generally made everyone's life difficult with his restlessness. Florence managed him the same way she managed everything else, with firm efficiency and occasional gentle humor. On the third day of his forced convalescence, she brought the ledgers to his room and sat beside his bed to review them together. When they'd finished, he caught her hand before she could leave. "You never answered my question," he said. "You never properly asked it. You were concussed." "I'm not concussed now." He shifted carefully, wincing at the movement. "Florence Olivetti, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" She studied his face, the sincerity in his storm-gray eyes, the hope and vulnerability there. This man who'd seen her not as a spinster past her prime, but as a woman of worth and capability. This man who'd given her purpose and then, unexpectedly, given her his heart. "Yes," she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you." His smile was brighter than the winter sun on snow. He pulled her down gently, kissing her with a tenderness that made her tremble. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll make you happy," he promised. "I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. You already do." They were married in late January in a small ceremony in the main house with Douglas and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. The minister from Hamilton performed the service, clearly surprised but pleased by the match. Florence wore a simple dress of deep blue, and Henry, his arm still in a sling, stood tall beside her. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, his own mother's ring that Mrs. Chen had kept safe all these years, Florence felt the final pieces of her broken past fall away. She was no longer a failed Philadelphia socialite or a pitied spinster. She was Florence Northwood, rancher's wife and partner. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Henry careful of his healing injuries, both of them learning the language of touch and intimacy together. Afterward, lying in his arms in the room they now shared, Florence felt a peace she'd never known. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For seeing me, really seeing me." "I should be thanking you. You saved this ranch and you saved me." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I love you, Florence Northwood." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "I love you too." Spring brought new challenges and new joys. As the snow melted and the land turned green, Florence discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Henry with a joy so profound, he actually swept her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen until Mrs. Chen scolded him for being reckless. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A baby." "That does tend to happen," Florence replied dryly, but she was smiling. The pregnancy was smooth, and Florence continued managing the ranch through most of it, only stepping back from the heaviest work in her final months. Henry fussed over her constantly, driving her to distraction with his worried hovering. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening in August. "Women have been doing this since the dawn of time." "Other women aren't carrying my child," he countered. "I'm allowed to worry." Their son was born in early October, exactly 1 year after Florence had first arrived at the ranch. They named him Thomas, after Henry's father, and he was healthy and loud and perfect. Henry held the baby with such tender care that Florence fell in love with him all over again. "Look at him," Henry whispered, studying the tiny face. "He has your nose, poor thing. Your beautiful nose." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under their joint management. Florence's organizational skills and Henry's knowledge of cattle and land proved to be a formidable combination. They expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and established contracts with buyers as far away as Chicago. The townspeople of Hamilton, who'd once gossiped about the impropriety of their arrangement, now pointed to the Northwood Ranch as an example of success. Florence, once dismissed as a spinster past her prime, was now respected as a shrewd businesswoman and devoted mother. When Thomas was 3, their daughter was born, a tiny, fierce creature they named Margaret after Florence's sister. Florence had reconciled with Margaret by then, through carefully worded letters that rebuilt their relationship slowly. Margaret had visited once, bringing her own 2 children, and had been impressed by the life Florence had built. "You were right to leave," Margaret had said quietly, watching Henry play with Thomas in the yard. "You found something real here, something true." The years rolled on, marked by roundups and harsh winters, by the expansion of the herd and the building of new outbuildings, by the growth of their children and the deepening of their love. Thomas grew tall and serious, inheriting his father's way with cattle and his mother's head for numbers. Margaret was all fire and determination, already announcing at age 5 that she intended to run the biggest ranch in Wyoming. "She gets that from you," Henry told Florence one evening, watching their daughter organize her younger brother into an elaborate game that involved precise rules and careful planning. "She gets it from both of us," Florence replied, leaning against his shoulder. They sat on the porch, the same spot where Henry had first confessed his feelings all those years ago. Thomas, now 8, was reading in the lamplight inside. Margaret, 6, was finally winding down from her day's adventures. And Florence, 33 years old now, felt more content than she'd ever imagined possible. "You ever think about Philadelphia?" Henry asked. "About what your life might have been if things had gone differently?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I can't regret any of it, not even the hard parts. They brought me here to this life. If I'd married that charlatan back then, or if I'd stayed in Philadelphia, I never would have found this." "Found what?" "Home, purpose, love." She turned to kiss him softly. "You." He pulled her closer. "I used to think I was content alone. I had the ranch, the work, and I told myself that was enough. Then you arrived, this serious, efficient woman with sad eyes and capable hands, and everything changed. You made me realize what I'd been missing." "We made each other whole," Florence said. "We did." As the years continued to pass, their partnership only strengthened. When Thomas was 15, he began taking on more responsibility around the ranch, working alongside his father with an easy competence that made both parents proud. Margaret, at 13, had a gift for horse training that surprised everyone. Florence and Henry had 3 more children over the years, 2 more boys and another girl, until their house rang with the chaos and joy of a full family. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Henry took Florence back to the spot where they'd first talked on the porch, where he'd first told her he cared for her. The children were all occupied, the ranch running smoothly under Douglas's temporary supervision. 20 years, he said, taking her hand. 20 years since I found the courage to tell you how I felt. Best decision you ever made, Florence teased. Second best. The first was hiring you in the first place. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I never properly courted you, never gave you the romance you deserved. We went from employer and employee to married so quickly, without all the traditional steps. I never minded. I know, but I minded, so I have something for you. He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace, a gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a mountain. To represent the bighorns and this place that became our home. Florence's eyes filled with tears as he fastened it around her neck. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. More beautiful now than the day I met you, and you were stunning then. He cupped her face in his hands. Florence Northwood, you are the love of my life. Every day with you is a gift. Every challenge we've faced together and come out stronger. You took a struggling ranch and a lonely man and turned them both into something extraordinary. We did that together, she corrected, but she was smiling through her tears. Together, he agreed, and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness of their 20 years together. That night, lying in bed, Florence thought about the girl she'd been at 25. Lost, alone, dismissed by society as having no value or future. She thought about the telegram that had arrived on her birthday, the one that had seemed like the final blow but had actually been the catalyst for everything good that followed. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked, sensing she was still awake. "About labels," she said. "About how people tried to define me by what I wasn't. Not young enough, not married, not valuable. You were always valuable. They were just too foolish to see it. You saw it." "I saw you," he said simply, "and I fell in love with everything I saw." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease and intimacy of 2 decades together. Afterward, Florence traced patterns on Henry's chest, her mind at peace. "You know what I realized?" she asked. "What?" "I was never past my prime. I was just waiting for the right person to recognize what I had to offer. All those people who called me a spinster, who pitied me or dismissed me, they were measuring me by the wrong standards. They were fools, maybe. Or maybe they just couldn't see beyond their narrow view of what a woman's life should be." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw potential where others saw failure. That changed everything." "You changed everything," he countered. "You took that chance and turned it into something remarkable. All I did was open a door. You're the one who walked through it and transformed everything on the other side." As autumn arrived again, marking Florence's 38th year and their family's continued prosperity, the ranch hummed with activity. Thomas, now 20, had taken over much of the day-to-day cattle operations, freeing Henry to focus on expansion and long-term planning. Margaret, 18, had started a successful horse breeding program that attracted buyers from across the territory. Florence managed it all: the accounts, the schedules, the coordination of their growing operation, with the same efficiency she'd brought to the work 20 years earlier. But now she did it with confidence, with the knowledge that she'd built something lasting. One crisp October morning, she stood on the porch watching the sun rise over the mountains, the same mountains Henry had given her in miniature on their anniversary. She touched the pendant at her throat, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. Henry emerged from the house, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He'd gotten older, his dark hair now streaked with silver, lines deepening around his eyes. But to Florence, he'd only grown more handsome, more solid, more essential. "Morning," he said, handing her a cup. "Morning." They stood in companionable silence, watching the ranch wake up. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. In the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied in the corrals. Their children's voices drifted from inside the house, arguing cheerfully about something trivial. "You ever regret it?" Florence asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on a spinster from town?" Henry looked at her, and the love in his eyes was as strong as it had been 2 decades ago. "Not for a single second. You were never a spinster, Florence. You were a woman waiting for the right partner, the right opportunity, the right life. I was just lucky enough to be the one who recognized that. We were both lucky. We were both smart," he corrected, "and brave. And willing to look past what society expected to find what we actually needed." Florence leaned against him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, coffee and leather and the Wyoming morning. "I love you, Henry Northwood. I love you too, Florence Northwood, my partner, my wife, my everything." As the sun continued to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Florence felt a profound sense of gratitude. The town of Hamilton had labeled her a spinster at 25, past her prime, without value or future. But Henry had seen a woman in her prime, full of potential and strength and capability. He'd been right, and she'd proven it every day since. Their life together wasn't perfect. They'd faced droughts and harsh winters, difficult births and childhood illnesses, market fluctuations and the endless challenges of running a ranch. But they'd faced it all together, partners in every sense of the word. Thomas emerged from the barn, leading his favorite horse. He waved to his parents and Florence waved back, her heart swelling with pride. Margaret followed, already deep in conversation with one of the hands about a training technique. "Look at what we built," Henry said softly. Florence looked. She saw the thriving ranch, the healthy cattle, the well-maintained buildings. She saw their children, strong and capable and loved. She saw the life they'd created from nothing but determination and mutual respect and love. "We built something extraordinary," she agreed. "We built something true." As winter approached again, the ranch prepared for the cold months ahead. Florence coordinated the storage of feed and supplies with her usual efficiency, but now she had help. Thomas had developed his own system for managing the cattle's winter grazing, and Margaret had organized the hands' schedules to maximize efficiency during the difficult months. "You've taught them well," Henry observed, watching their children work. "We've taught them well," Florence corrected. "They have your work ethic and my organizational skills. A dangerous combination," he laughed. "The ranchers around here don't know what's going to hit them when this next generation takes over." Florence's youngest daughter, Sarah, now 10 years old, had recently announced her intention to become a lawyer, inspired by a book she'd read about women breaking into male-dominated professions. Her twin brothers, 8-year-old James and John, were already showing signs of their parents' various talents. "You think we'll ever truly retire?" Florence asked one December evening, watching snow fall outside the window. "Retire from what? Living?" "I plan to keep working this ranch until I can't anymore." Henry pulled her closer on the settee they shared. "But maybe we'll travel someday. See San Francisco, visit Margaret back east, show you some of the places I've only heard about." "I'd like that. Though I'm not sure I could stay away from the ranch for too long." "It gets in your blood, doesn't it? The land, the work, the rhythm of it all." "It does. Or maybe it's the life we built here that I can't imagine leaving, even temporarily." Their 25th anniversary arrived with little fanfare, falling in the midst of one of the busiest times of the year. But Henry surprised Florence by taking her to Hamilton for a rare dinner out, arranging for the children to manage things at home for an evening. The restaurant was modest but nice, and as they ate, Florence marveled at how the town had changed. Hamilton had grown significantly over the years, new buildings replacing old ones, new families settling in the area. The people who'd once gossiped about her now greeted her with respect, asking her advice on business matters or requesting her help with accounts. "You've become a pillar of the community," Henry noted, following her gaze around the restaurant. "We both have." The Northwood Ranch is one of the success stories of the region. It's more than that. You've helped other women start businesses, taught school children mathematics, served on town committees. You've made a difference here, Florence. She felt a flush of pride. "I just did what needed doing." "You did what you do best. You saw what was needed and you made it happen, efficiently and effectively and with grace." He reached across the table to take her hand. 25 years ago, I was a desperate rancher looking for help. I had no idea I'd find the love of my life. I was a desperate woman looking for any opportunity. I had no idea I'd find home. Here's to 25 more years, Henry said, raising his glass. To forever, Florence replied, clinking her glass against his. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas married a lovely woman from a neighboring ranch, and they settled in a house Henry built for them on the northern section of the property. Margaret surprised everyone by marrying a professor from back east who had no ranching experience but was willing to learn, enchanted by both the land and his fierce, capable wife. Florence became a grandmother, and the role suited her beautifully. She'd rock the babies while simultaneously reviewing accounts, teach the toddlers their numbers while managing correspondence, somehow finding space in her well-ordered life for the beautiful chaos of grandchildren. Henry, now in his 60s, had slowed down somewhat, finally willing to leave more of the daily operations to Thomas and the other hands. But he still rode out most mornings, checking on the herd, inspecting fences, maintaining the intimate knowledge of his land that had made the ranch successful. On a warm June evening, when Florence was 55 years old and they were approaching their 30th anniversary, she and Henry sat on the porch in their customary spots. 3 decades of this ritual had worn slight hollows into the porch boards where they placed their chairs. 30 years, Florence mused. When I received that telegram on my 25th birthday, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd become exactly what everyone said I was, a failure, a spinster, a woman with no future. And instead I found everything. Purpose, partnership, love, family. She looked at him. You gave me that, Henry. You and this ranch and this life. You gave it to yourself, he corrected gently. I just offered an opportunity. You're the one who took it and turned it into something magnificent. You're the one who had the courage to leave Hamilton, to try something new, to believe you were worth more than what others said about you. We made each other better. We did. We do. He stood, joints creaking slightly with age, and extended his hand. Dance with me. There's no music. We'll make our own. So they danced on the porch in the fading light, moving slowly to a rhythm only they could hear. Inside the house, their youngest children were doing homework. Across the property, Thomas and his wife were putting their own children to bed. In town, Margaret was probably engaged in a spirited debate with her professor husband about something philosophical and ultimately unimportant. It was an ordinary evening on an ordinary day, and it was perfect. I love you, Florence whispered against Henry's chest as they swayed. I love you too, my Florence, my partner, my wife in her prime. She laughed softly. I'm 55 years old, and you're in your prime. You've always been in your prime. That's what those fools in town never understood. A woman's prime isn't about her age. It's about her spirit, her capability, her strength. By that measure, you've been in your prime since the day I met you, and you'll stay there until the day we die. Years later, as they celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, with the ranch more prosperous than ever, Florence thought about Henry's words. She was 65 now, her hair more silver than brown, her face lined with the years of laughter and hard work and life well lived. But she felt no diminishment, no sense of being past her usefulness or her prime. She still managed the ranch accounts, though Thomas had taken on more of that work. She still advised on major decisions her counsel sought and valued. She still had purpose, still had work that mattered, still had love. Henry, now 70, had finally retired from the heavy ranch work, though he still rode out regularly to check on things. He moved slower now, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for both his land and his wife undiminished. 40 years, he said, echoing the words he'd spoken on every anniversary. 40 years since the best decision of my life. Their children had organized a celebration, with neighbors and friends from across the region attending. The house overflowed with people. The yard had been set up with tables and chairs, and someone had hired musicians from town. As Florence moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and good wishes, she caught fragments of conversations. Remember when folks said it was scandalous, her going to work on his ranch, best partnership in the territory if you ask me. They raised fine children, all of them successful. She's the one who helped my daughter with her business plan, smart as a whip. Florence found Henry standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching the celebration with a contented smile. She slipped her hand into his. Happy anniversary, she said. Happy anniversary, my love. Any regrets? Not a single one, you, not one. They stood together, watching their children dance with their spouses, their grandchildren race around the yard in games of their own invention, their friends celebrate the life they'd built together. You know what I think about sometimes? Florence asked. What? That telegram. The one that arrived on my 25th birthday, telling me my father had died and I had nothing. At the time, it felt like the end of everything. Now I realize it was the beginning. If my father hadn't died, if I hadn't been left with nothing, I never would have been desperate enough to take a job on a remote ranch. I never would have met you. Fate works in mysterious ways. Or maybe it's just that endings and beginnings are sometimes the same thing, and we can't tell the difference until years later. Henry pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I'm grateful for whatever chain of events brought you to me. Fate, chance, desperation, doesn't matter. What matters is that you came, you stayed, and you built this life with me. Forever, Florence said, the promise she'd made 40 years ago. Forever, he echoed. As the sun set over the Bighorn Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, Florence Northwood stood in her husband's arms and felt completely, perfectly content. She thought of the girl she'd been at 25, broken and lost and dismissed by the world as having no value. That girl couldn't have imagined this life, this love, this beautiful, hard-won happiness. But the woman she'd become, the woman Henry had always seen in her, had made it all possible. She was 65 years old, grandmother to a dozen children, matriarch of a thriving ranch, respected member of her community and deeply, enduringly loved. She was, in every way that mattered, a woman in her prime. And she would remain so, Henry's hand in hers, for all the years yet to come. The celebration continued late into the evening, but eventually the guests departed, and the family helped clean up before heading to their own homes. Florence and Henry sat on the porch one more time, watching the stars appear in the vast Wyoming sky. "Thank you," Florence said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing in me when no one else did, for loving me. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough rancher who didn't know how to properly court a woman, for making this ranch, this life, into something extraordinary, for loving me back." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and complete. 40 more years?" Henry asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "However many we get," Florence replied, "and I'll treasure every single day. As will I." The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had looked down on a desperate woman arriving at a strange ranch 30 years ago. The same stars that had witnessed every moment of the life she'd built here, every challenge overcome, every joy celebrated, every quiet moment of love. Florence thought about the labels people had tried to give her over the years. Spinster, old maid, past her prime. She thought about how those words had once had the power to wound her, to make her feel less than, to convince her that her life had no value. But Henry had shown her the truth. She'd always had value. She'd always had capability and strength and potential. She just needed someone to recognize it, and then the courage to recognize it in herself. "I love you, Henry Northwood," she said, "not for the first time and not for the last. I love you too, Florence Northwood. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together as the night deepened. Two people who'd found each other against the odds, who'd built a life of meaning and purpose and love. Two people who proved that society's labels meant nothing compared to the truth of who someone really was. A rancher who'd seen not a spinster, but a woman in her prime. A woman who'd found not just employment, but home, partnership, and enduring love. Together, they'd created something that would last for generations. A legacy not just of land and cattle, but of what was possible when two people truly saw each other and chose to build a life together. As Florence finally rose to go inside, Henry's hand still clasped in hers, she looked back once more at the ranch spread out below them. Lights glowed in the bunkhouse. The barn stood solid and strong. The corrals held horses that would work tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. It was beautiful. It was home. It was exactly where she was meant to be, and she was, now and always, a woman in her prime.